Narayana IAS Academy, your one-stop destination to make your UPSC vision a reality. I welcome you to today's daily news analysis segment with us, where, as a protocol, to make your UPSC journey easy, we break down UPSC relevant articles for both mains and prelims, which are picked up. They are all handpicked from the Hindu, the Hyderabad edition, and the Indian Express, the New Delhi edition. So today I welcome you on our 20th April segment of DNA, where I have taken one mains as well as 3 to 4 important prelims articles for you. And before we begin, like we always do, to motivate our UPSC aspirants, here's a small quotation. The quotation says, either do it now or regret later. So which means that our actions, our hard work, our initiatives of today, they pay us huge volumes tomorrow. Agreed that UPSC journey can be daunting sometimes, excessive syllabus, time limitation, and the need to focus consistently. And I think that's exactly the beauty of the exam, that it not only enriches you with lots of knowledge, multi-dimensional knowledge, but the biggest feat is that it also teaches you how to keep calm and continue to persist, to persevere despite time limitations. And on that encouraging note, let's quickly have a look at the key articles for today. Well, the first article today, which corresponds to your mains exam, has been picked up from the Indian Express, page number 11, the New Delhi edition. Why I have selected this for mains is because it is extremely relevant for your GS paper 1, that's education and equality, and GS paper 2, social justice, where we talk about the key problems which confront India's primary, secondary and higher education segment. And this article here has been penned by Dr. P. Chidambaram. The article highlights into the key problems that are relentlessly faced by Indian universities, Indian colleges and institute of technical importance. So what are these problems? Let me quickly give you a brief context of the article. Now the article says how it is the University Grants Commission which regulates and controls the higher university or the Indian higher education segment, but there is a problem. Unlike US and unlike Europe, which house one of the most world famous institutes like the Columbia University, the Stanford, the Harvard University, institutes of excellence, in India we do have potence. We do have capacity to offer best of education in the academia, to offer the most nuanced technical skills. But the problem is that our universities are still being conducted, they are still being administered in a very, very bureaucratic, in a very, very red tapist, in a very, very government controlled mechanism. That's the problem. Universities here, despite being excellent, despite being centers of great pedagogy, are unable to meet the targets. The article therefore also makes a thin comparison between why Indian universities are yet not featuring in the top-notch institutes across the globe. Do we lack the right pedagogy? Do we lack the right method of teaching? No. So we have some of the most accomplished professors and trainers. The government has spent a lot. Specifically, ever since we have the new education policy 2020, the government has been giving a lot of focus in improving the infrastructure, in digitizing, in enabling smart classroom and divided, that's called the flipped classroom method. We will discuss about this shortly. Despite the fact that the government has invested in the higher education segment, today the outcomes are still poor. So the problem is not the content or the method of teaching in the university. The problem is a lack of autonomy, a decision making by these universities, and therefore the article says that today there is a constant interference by UGC in university affairs. When we are completely outsourcing all decisions, whether it's a micro decision of investing in classroom apparatus, teaching materials, or whether it is something major as revamping the campus, allowing distance education for foreign students,
all these then become government control. They are then marred by bureaucracy, and therefore it definitely affects very, very poorly the quality of education and specifically the innovation and research that Indian universities are providing. So therefore the article says that today we need urgent reforms. The article has provided. The author has given a certain set of measures which should be adopted immediately to ensure that universities continue to have at least some autonomy. So now that we know the central axis of the article is the complaint about lack of university autonomy, decision making, and therefore high quality research. How does it impact Indian higher education segment? Well, the results are there for everyone to see. So for example, the article says among the top 100 research centers and universities in the world, when you talk about the QS World University ranking, then it is from India just the IIT Bombay that is considered as one of the best superlative institutes, and even then it is ranked at 118. It's nowhere among the top 100. Similarly, when we talk about central universities, we say that even today there are more than 5,000 positions in central universities for teachers, for faculty, which haven't been enrolled for. So you see the gap that exists in the administrative mechanism. There are no teachers while the enrollment levels are very, very high year after the other. Similarly, talking about placements, there has been more than 5% decline just in the period from 23 to 24 when you talk about the IITs, supposedly the temples of technical education, and when you talk about the NITs, even there we see that there has been a persistent close to 11% drop in campus placements. So what does it show? Does it show lack of right content, lack of teaching expertise? No. Does it show a lack of enrollment? No. It purely shows that one, we have a shortage. We have a paucity for trained professionals, which aren't being fulfilled fast, again because of over government control. And the second problem is that we are not allowing innovation and research. Today's job market does not only see passive skills, it does not only go behind the degree holding of individual employees. If they lack right innovation and research methods, therefore automatically the employability in job market boils down to zero. Say for example SpaceX. In the last 2 years we know that SpaceX has been hiring across the world in a very democratic way. Multiple nationality hiring is going on, but what they focus upon is innovation. They had hired a teenage boy as one of the employees, to the shock of most degree holders. Why? Because the person had showed intense fascination and capability to research and innovative solutions to problems. So that's clear that today if we need work in the ever-changing dynamic job market, we need to be innovative, we need to have experienced some kind of a research project, and that's purely missing in universities. When you do not have autonomy, when you do not have the right apparatus, you cannot expect innovation to happen at all. So now therefore we also say that it is causing a chronic. Chronic is something that's long term and very difficult to address. Indian university segment has been marred with a chronic problem. And what's that problem? The problem is that we lack alumni support, because funding is a major problem. With lack of funds at their disposal, the university administrators, the staff, finds it difficult to enable more research options for students, disable them to allow more student exchange programs at a global level, disable them to engage with the learning community of the West, some of the brilliant universities that you have. It's difficult. It's also difficult to have online collaborations and online research work. Why? Because there is lack of funding. So why? The article says why. Can we not seek alumni support? Now, majority of students who are the alumni of such prestigious institutes like the IITs, like the IIMs and other higher technical institutes, why are they not allowed to put some private funding into research? Would this not open up better vistas for our students? Yes, it would, but that's a grey area. Similarly, without grants, there is always inadequate research facility. Over-regulation by the University Grants Commission sometimes leads to ideological domination in university administration. Sometimes political parties' agenda decide curriculum, and that's a major problem. Another thing could be that since there is too much overlap of bureaucracy and government into university affairs, sometimes teachers who have ideas of conducting better research, changing syllabus. Now again, that's a very big grey area. Today, after the National Education Policy 2020, the government has seemed to put in a lot of new ideas in the NCERT syllabus at the school level. The government is giving more autonomy definitely to some colleges, especially private colleges, to change and make the curriculum more modernized, to make it more applicable, to make it more job friendly. But is that happening in the industries? Is it happening in the universities that are under government control, that come under the aegis of UGC? No, that's not happening. So therefore, we today do not have the freedom to little bit also customize our content to make it more employment friendly, and that's again a problem here. And then the article delves into distance education. The article says that post-COVID pandemic 2020, one of the major concerns actually with regards to your education system has been distance education. We know that after the pandemic, a major problem that we've had is that majority people have become accustomed to online learning. Now here comes the word flipped classroom format of learning. Post-pandemic, majority of universities, not only Indian but across the world, they had adopted a mixed curriculum, a mixed format of learning. Flipped means divided into two, bifurcated into the online learning mechanism and the offline learning mechanism. So today we have that freedom that universities can allow distance enrollment. University can have on-campus learning, which is a great thing to happen. But now the problem is that earlier the universities had the permission in India to admit as many students from global backgrounds, from different countries as the seats were, depending on the availability of seats. But today the problem is that the new UGC regulation is creating an upper limit, a glass ceiling effect. We cannot have many enrollments anymore. There is a complete upper cap and upper limit to it. Besides, students will be taken only from 1 to 2 districts. Limited number of seats depending on districts, population. There is an upper cap on various factors. So again, that snatches away the autonomy that was provided to the university to enroll more and more students. So how does it really impact? What's the overall impact? The first impact is on student learning. Students lose the choice to get educated in the best, most employable curriculum. Second problem is the university administrators, they get demotivated of making any kind of change in the infrastructure of the university or on the content, the soft skills being given in the university. Last but not the least, it really hampers the overall quality, research and innovative based learning. It defeats the purpose. So are there any solutions here? What does the article say? There are. The article says that indeed we can repeal or we can create some amendment or we can reenact the UGC Act to suit the demands of modern day industry, modern day education. Second thing we could do is that please allow more freedom, more autonomy to the industries to change curriculum, to hire better quality faculty, to fill up the posts because there is a huge demand supply gap. It's called academic inflationary pressure, where you have a lot of students and you have barely mentors to coach them in these institutes. So that's again a major grey area. Similarly, financial independence, yes, that we have to find alternative funding mechanisms for our universities and higher institutes of learning. Because if they only depend on government on funds, then neither will the funding be adequate. Besides, those funds will never be able to get channelized into innovation, research and right skills. Another thing is that we also need to make sure that campuses are free from political ideologies. Now, recently we've seen a lot of spate happening in universities like the JNU, we had the Aligarh Muslim University, of course we had the Delhi University as well. In all these cases, we've seen that campuses have become hotbeds of political rivalry. There are student groups, rather student political factions, which fight among each other, which make sure that political ideologies are dominating various campuses. Not only it is divisive, but also it takes away the time. Say for example, as per the government permission, as per the UGC regulation, if per week Literally about 35 hours should be spent on learning. When universities become hubs of political interfering and political ideology, then the learning time collapses down to barely 15 to 20. So which means when there is lack of time to finish the syllabus, lack of adequate assessment, then what kind of a research can we even conceive about? So these are certain things that we have to remove political ideology and its interference from learning campuses. And the best way to do is to make sure that these universities do not depend on the government for their entire funding needs. That's important. Now with that, it also says that we must make sure that all the funding that comes to these universities is more secular. When we say more secularized, when we say more ideology free funding, what we are trying to say is that please call in more private companies. Now recently there were initiatives by say Google Inc. or by Tata who were going and collaborating with various colleges, and they were introducing new learning programs which would enable students to find better jobs or campus placements. So we need something similar on a broader scale. We can definitely allow, the government can allow roping in of certain private companies, MNCs who are doing great work, who have great employability, who have great opportunities which they can offer to the students. So they can make a mixed curricula. They can make sure that they train students in such a manner that they then later can also provide job opportunities. That's important. Similarly, the university professors could also take more inputs when it comes to teaching methods from not only some of the very nuanced experts at these multinational companies, but also we can foster more global unification of research methods. So why not we do an on-campus learning training sessions between mentors and teachers from the best universities across the world? That would also enable enrichment of pedagogy. Similarly, we could make sure that there are some volunteers, say not only rich individuals, but some trusts, some cooperatives, which if they want could contribute money to the university development. It would help in both ways, in developing the hard infrastructure, yes, and definitely in improving the soft quality, that is the soft skill aspect of education. So all these the article is suggesting. And now why is the article so important? Because very often we see in your GS paper 1 and 2, there are questions, in fact even in GS paper 4 ethics, you could always have a question which says that does political ideology or too much interference by politics, too much bureaucratic model of control hamper the higher education outcomes in India? A question could be posed on that. Similarly, we have a mains practice question here, which also resonates with the article. It says the erosion of academic freedom, that's the freedom given to centers of learning in Indian universities, is a huge threat. It's endangering democracy itself. Discuss the significance of the academic freedom of universities in a democratic polity. So that's a very interesting question. Obviously, we have discussed everything in this article that we just broke down. The article said the same thing, that if we were to address this question, we would simply introduce the question by first discussing about what is academic freedom, when we enable the universities or institutes of higher learning, technical learning, to not only modulate the infrastructure which is more student friendly, education centric, but also we must make sure that university learning and students are not too over impacted by government or political ideologies, by vested interests of the parties which are in the power. Second thing, we must make sure that universities have the freedom to rope in the best talent from across the world, to make sure campuses are great learning centers, not only centers of passive learning that comes in a one-way format, unilateral learning, just by learning things that are being taught to you by a teacher or through books. No. We are talking about a democratic learning in which students are active participation. They are not only participants, but it is also a model which talks about a two-way interaction. This is called a student-driven learning approach. So this is the need of the hour, and it will not happen unless you give the university administration the right to enhance infrastructure, the right to improve curriculum and pedagogy. So that's something that we are talking about. You could of course then write about the body of this question by in a very point-wise fashion, by mentioning how can you ensure that? Yes, of course, by making sure that there is not a complete dependence of these universities on the government for funding. We should allow more democratic sources of funding. We should allow for wider funding sources. Then you could give examples like the alumni support, of course the support from various trusts, support from private companies, multinational companies, from volunteering individuals. We could then talk about allowing more students to get enrolled from other countries into India's digital learning domain. That is, universities must have a flipped classroom format. Of course, it should be offline, but of course, it should be digitized for people who are not physically here. Just like India today is being known for its medical tourism, particularly in Africa, West Asia, South America, tomorrow India will very well also be known as the education destination of the world, provided we reach out to more people. We have the autonomy of having a better user base in terms of going digital. So that autonomy is important, and that will not come unless UGC is completely sitting heavy on all the decisions that are happening in the universities. And then of course you could conclude by saying that what are the benefits of giving the universities more freedom? Of course we see a better student enrollment, we see a better reach. Of course we see that the learning is more employable, it's more employment centric. Of course we see that there are best practices in the learning method and in the infrastructure. This is very much in line with the NEP, our National Education Policy 2020. And the best thing we could cover here is that specifically when we talk about universities which are also including vocational learning in its curriculum, they play a major role, because today we are living in the era of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Back in 2022, there was a huge cry, hue and cry about the PM Vishwakarma scheme. That was just a very small example to show how today the Indian government is focusing on vocation-based skill training. No wonder, even when you talk about the national education policy, a fundamental component here is about vocational skills, because they are employable. So what we need today, that's the core of the article, what we need today is not static knowledge and information that you can just absorb and then go on with an education system that's very stereotypical. What we are really looking at is have better vocational skills, learn better entrepreneur skills, so that even in a dicey job market, the Indian demographic dividend is represented well. You get better jobs and you have a better financial security. Hence, give universities more innovation, more research and more freedom. That's where we close the article. And now to the next article of the day, which talks about an issue that is already being spoken about every single day since the last week. Ever since US had made headlines by saying that the new tariff policy in the US will impact global supply chains. It has multiple ramifications, not only economically, but also politically, socially, culturally. How? Let's quickly have. Also environmentally. Let's see how. So, this article has been picked up from The Hindu, the Hyderabad edition, page number 14. The article talks about the same issue. It's like old wine, but the bottle is definitely new here. Because we talk about how the trade war, how the new tariff war that has erupted, specifically between US, China, there are multi other stakeholders here. What dangers does it pose to India? Are we getting impacted really? Do we have a dicey future too? Okay, let's see. So the article talks about how under the Donald Trump's new protectionist agenda, where it wants to really protect its economy. Now remember that it sounds very ironical, it sounds very farcical. Talking about a country, an economy that's one of the most powerful economies across the globe. An economy which had begun its globalization agenda very heavily right from the times of the Second World War onwards, when US had left behind its a very, very protectionist agenda, and it had jumped off completely. It was ready to go very, very multilateral. It was complete pro-globalization. Of course, we also call this as a soft power, cultural penetration, economic imperialism. You call it whatever you may. But we know that US's dominance in the global trade supply chains has been tremendous. It has been one of the largest trading partners for countries like India, China, and many other countries, many other powerful emerging economies. But now what? Suddenly, why this new ideology of protectionism? So today we are seeing a situation where Donald Trump's United States of America's president's decision, which is often referred to as the Liberation Day tariffs, which mean that now US is going to increase tax and tariff on a wide range of products, wide range of commodities which are imported into the US. Why in the first place did US have to take this decision? Reasons given by the US government are, we want to protect our economy. In the sense that not only do we want our local manufacturers to benefit, we also want our population to find better job opportunities, which often are snatched away by people from the other countries. So therefore, our manufacturing sector, our indigenous economy and its manufacturing capacity completely suffers in the process. So that's why it is trying to cut off the competition for its own citizens by making an initiative like that. Of course, the world community is taking it with a pinch of salt. People aren't happy. We have seen the retaliation by China. Also for India, it has meant a huge change in its trade policies and the way economy has been functioning. So the article therefore says that when US said that we are going to now completely increase by a major percentage our tariffs on imports from various nations, China immediately retaliated by imposing similar kind of tariff on the US. And then of course what happened? Today, we are facing a situation where the global trade chains are under big time threat because a majority of countries look up to the US as a major trading partner, and India is not different here. So therefore, what is happening? When a massive economy, when a big market like US is not going to be available, then where will all the other countries like China, like Japan, like countries from South America and Europe send their products? Where will they export their products? Who will buy them? Which is the largest destination, one of the most populous countries, India. So therefore, we are under threat now. Under the threat of what? Under the threat of dumping. Now please understand that social dumping is different from economic dumping. Social dumping corresponds to social justice. It's a problem of labor exploitation. That's a completely different area. We are talking about goods dumping, economic dumping here. Let's see what does that mean, and is it actually a fear or are we overreacting? Let's see. So first let's understand what are tariffs really. Majority of students might be reading these articles and they might be figuring out, okay, but what do we really mean by this tariff thing? What's the whole debate about? So tariffs are basically taxes which are imposed or which are put on goods, commodities which are purchased from other countries. Okay. Generally what happens, these are about a heavy percentage of the value of a particular product. So which means if a country is buying from outside and if the government puts too much tariff on that, the price to the customer will increase. Okay. So for the customer, it will become expensive to then buy or invest in that product. That's important to remember. So 10% tariff or the tax, say for example, on goods from other countries means that the customer will have to pay literally about $10 more to buy the same product which he or she in America was buying earlier. Okay, so that's the loss that they will suffer. $1 extra tax, which is taking the entire cost to say about $11. So, and in terms of euro, of course, it is 8.35. So, in different currencies, but ultimately, who will face the incidence of this taxation? Who will face the final impact? The brunt of it will go to the customer. So, what happens in that case? Demand declines. People will refuse to buy. There will be inflation. Or on the other hand, what happens? People will start then depending more on locally produced commodities. It's a very simple way of cutting down of your imports. Now, having said that, now what happens? There is another problem. One, of course, is that consumers will not be able to afford the commodities coming from other countries, so imports will go down, demand will go down. Another aspect of the problem is that companies, multinational companies or factories which are selling goods to the US, who were exporting goods to the US, will now have to pay extra tax to the government. So that will again be a problem for them. Their business output suffers because they will have to pay more taxation. So what happens to them? Their production process will also become more expensive. So then what are the main concerns of this initiative? The main concerns are that this is erupting into a major trade war now. We are talking about a country that has trade links with almost every strong economy. And we are talking about a situation in 2025 where we are living in an extremely globalized world. Okay, in that situation today, this trade war has erupted because if US has said that we are putting 145% extra tariffs on Chinese goods, then in retaliation China said the same thing, that we will impose 125% on US products, which means both of these will no longer be able to become amicable or good, robust trade partners for each other. If they are not giving each other's markets, then who will provide this market? Other countries which have a massive population. That's the problem now. So India comes in the picture automatically. So Trump also said Donald Trump has also said that there is extra 10% tax that will be imposed on goods coming from all other countries. Of course, for China, it's 145%. For other countries also, it's a hike of 10% in the coming few months. Now, what's happening? The main problem is that if there is such a massive trade war between US and China, then what happens? Just as I said, there is a problem that all other countries who are suffering because of US tariff, who will now not be able to export goods to Europe, to US, what will they do? They have commodities, they have consignments. Where will all those products go? They will flood into the Indian market, and that's exactly called dumping. Okay, this is what you mean by economic dumping. So it is not just an issue of trade war, it's a major issue concerning dumping as such. A very common and popular question from GS paper 3, economy in UPSC mains. Of course, it's relevant for your prelims as well, because many other organizations come in the ambit here. You could talk about the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Of course, you could talk about the BRICS, because yesterday itself, in the same regard, talking about the trade war, Donald Trump was seen in the news criticizing BRICS like never before. So again, that becomes a prominent issue to be covered for the exam. And another thing is that, of course, it also talks about Indian economy, and how we are trying to face the challenge of dumping. Are we doing any anti-dumping measures to save ourselves? That's what the article also talks about. So now another concern article has highlighted is that the Indian government today is worried, therefore. There's a danger to us. The danger is that goods coming from China, Vietnam, major producers of goods and commodities, developing economies like your Indonesia, all these countries will now have to sell their products to India. They will have no option but to reroute their products into India now that US as an option has stopped. It has receded. So therefore, for India, there is a two-way danger. What is the two-way danger? Two-way problem. One, we are under the threat of dumping. We will face economic dumping. Second, our local manufacturers will suffer. Why did US take this step? To protect its domestic manufacturers. What about India's? When various countries, that too here we talk about overcapacity. Now that again is a very good question raised in this article, but indirectly. So when we analyze this article, it becomes important to focus on this also, that there is something which is referred to as overcapacity manufacturing, and China is very well known for this. What is this? Now countries like China, owing to very robust manufacturing process, we know China is a manufacturing hub. Here they manufacture lots and lots of product, more than their demand is, more than the domestic demand. There is always a supply side inflation that happens in China. When it is overproducing much more than its capacity of production, then what happens? It is dealing with extra inventory. Where will all that inventory go now that US is no more an option? It will be routed towards India anyhow, either through legitimate means or through cross-border smuggling. So India is in problem. This is only called dumping. When products manufactured in one country, at a very cheap price, they are being dumped in your country. So who will buy the local products? Nobody. No wonder we have our markets already flooded by Chinese-made electricity products, Chinese-made domestic products. We are trying to cut that down, but now how would we? If already a major purchaser has gone out of the game, then India, given our population size, our young market, our domestic demand is so high already, that too for products that are slightly lower priced, what happens? We will be the ready consumers. That's the big worry here. Even the same thing happens for US farm products also. Given that we do import lots of US farm products, for us it will be very difficult to retaliate because the dependence is too high. So for India to take an anti-dumping measure, we'll have to think twice. It may impact our domestic manufacturing production process in a very big way. So having said that, I've already explained to you what is dumping. So today India is worried that what if all the products, all the cheap commodities, all the cheap goods are now just dumped into the Indian market? What happens then? Our balance of trade, our imports rise tremendously. Plus they are coming at a very competitive price. They are good quality products coming from manufacturing hubs like Vietnam, Indonesia, China. So that's a danger for us, even Japan for that matter. So that's something that the article is also trying to talk about, that India is now a ready, open, large consumer base which is ready to consume. So they will keep supplying, and that's something that we must think about. How to stop this sudden influx, deluge, flood of all the cheap goods. This will undermine and it will cause a major competition for Indian manufacturers and producers. That's the concern. So today we say that which are the countries from where we have majority of threat, major threat in terms of dumping. One is Bangladesh. We know that Bangladesh's textile manufacturing segment is robust. 80% of all our garment exports. Okay, that's dangerous now, because if 80% of Bangladesh's exports are made up of only the textile segment, then India being a neighboring country, it's very easy for all this to be flooded in India, not only directly but also through smuggling and through cross border porous activities that happen. So that's a problem. It is a threat for Indian market, of course. India's textile industry is under threat. Similarly, Indonesia, when you talk about electronic segment, then of course it will try to send its surplus production into India. Easy market, huge demand. Same thing is with China. In fact, China is the worst here in terms of the threat that we perceive. China, we already know, is an overcapacity manufacturer. So what happens then? 95% of export productivity, capacity of China will be rerouted into the Indian market, given that with US it's having a trade war. So you see, that's the clear problem. And of course it impacts our MSME, our medium and small industries, in a very, very bad way, because it threatens our local manufacturing industries. When the local manufacturing industry is in threat, we also tomorrow look at a very high possibility of unemployment. Plus, we also look at a very increasing possibility of vulnerable unemployment, because today, to compete with these products that are coming from outside, Indian manufacturers will also keep mushrooming. They will try to compete with them by putting more and more efforts to produce more. What happens? That attracts more informal labor, that attracts more women, feminization of poverty, feminization of labor, child labor, all of those things also come into the picture. Recently, we had broken down an article on International Labour Organization that even today, India has not ratified all compulsory 8 conventions of the ILO. Only 6 we've done. 2 are still remaining, and that's a problem, because yet we are to address the gender aspect of it and the child labor aspect of it. So what happens then? Of course, this is the problem. When informal sector manufacturing will push hard to compete with these products, we will have these problems. Of course, there will also be a problem of rejection of domestic products, because those which are coming from outside, from China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, are cheaper. Of course, they are better quality, because these countries are known. They have a niche in this kind of a production. So that's something we are talking about. So now what happened? Maybe the large industries may not face a problem, because at least they have some competitive advantage. They have an edge. They are into exclusive sectors. But talking about the bulk consumer goods sector, they will definitely suffer. These industries will go for a toss. Now, what will government do? So government should interfere and take some anti-dumping initiatives. That's what the article says. And it says there are some measures available that we should adopt. One could be the anti-dumping duty. Yes, we must impose a higher anti-dumping duty to prevent over-flooding of our economy with external products, over-imports. How do we do that? We should allow below market value. We should allow below market value sales to be objected to. We should put some restriction on that. There has to be a fixed market value. Below that, no commodity coming from outside should allow to be sold at. Otherwise, what happens? Local manufacturing goes for a toss. Similarly, we should have a safeguard duty. Safeguard duty to protect our domestic manufacturing and production. Of course, we should have the countervailing duty, with the purpose that foreign subsidies that are granted to the exporters can be counteracted by the Indian government. And having said that, who could implement these measures? It is the Directorate General of Trade Remedies. After thorough investigation and research, we must make sure that implementation of these safeguards is expedited. And India's current response would be that although India must in future very soon consider this anti-dumping mechanism, but sometimes it becomes a problem. Specifically when we talk about countries like China, Korea, EU. One thing is that when you talk about our total imports, these are the countries which have limited participation. Another problem is there are certain industries which are completely dependent on these countries, say the pharmaceutical sector. Now we know that China is a major supplier of pharma raw materials to most of the countries, to many countries. Similar is the problem with the rare earth metals. That's another article of the day, interestingly. So when it comes to these things, blindly imposing anti-dumping duty sometimes could create a new trade war, which also disrupts our local manufacturing, like it had happened during COVID and during India's spat with China. So those are some things we need to think about. Also, we need to make sure that we have to safeguard the interests of our MSMEs. So unless we have a quick mechanism to stop dumping, our MSME sector is under threat. Okay. So with that, we now jump to our another article for prelims again, and this has been taken up from the Hindu. That's the Hyderabad edition, and the article says that there is a scope of life, signs of life, okay, signs of some organic activity that has been found in one of the planets referred to as K218b. So what's all this controversy about? And of course, not everybody is convinced, as the controversy is making a huge noise. People are amazed at the possibility of clear sign of having life existing beyond a known solar system. Critics do not agree. They say no, it's just a speculation, and unless there is more proof, unless there is more investigation, it's too early to be really happy about it. So the article just talks about this discovery. It says that it's a groundbreaking finding, that how the James Webb Space Telescope has found hints of a particular element. What is this element? This element is referred to as DMS. It could be broken down as dimethyl sulfide, DMS. That's the core of the article. This element has been found in the small planet called K218b. Why is it revolutionary? It's revolutionary because the article says this element can only be produced by certain organisms that are existing on the Earth. Say some bacteria, certain other organisms who inhabit our planet, Earth. They manufacture, they produce this element. So how come it was found in this planet K218b? Which means, does it also have a scope of life? That's something worth looking at. And it's a molecule which only living organisms can make. It is found in Earth's atmosphere. And now they are being found on this tiny exoplanet. So does it mean that we can now say that there is a very strong possibility that life has been found outside the solar system? Is this a huge cue towards extraterrestrial life? So this is the question with which the article has left us, and of course more research will happen on this issue. But from the prelims point of view, and in fact for your GS paper 3, that's science, technology and space exploration, we must not only know in detail about the James Webb Space Telescope. Just last week again it was in news. Apart from that, we should also know about the DMS, given that it's a very mesmerizing, it's a very shocking discovery. This particular element could also be critical from prelims point of view, that what do we really mean by dimethyl sulfide, and what is the relevance of this? Why is it found in the Earth's atmosphere, and how to date has been discovered on this tiny exoplanet K218b. So now it also says that NASA's James Webb telescope has detected that this planet therefore could possibly have an atmosphere too. Atmosphere means there could be some elements of gravity, because no wonder the atmosphere is being held on by this planet. It says that although K218b is 2.5 times the size of Earth, and it is about 700 trillion or 124 light years away, it is a distance that humans cannot conceive of traveling in a lifetime. It's not possible, and yet the possibility of life there just shows the intricacies involved in space research. Today we see that this telescope, the James Webb, it's so powerful that it has been able to actually tap into the chemical composition of an atmosphere which is situated 124 light years away. It also shows kudos. It talks wonderfully about the kind of feats we as human civilization are achieving. That if we can tap into the atmospheric composition of a planet that's 124 light years away, which means we are already capable today of much better, whether it's black hole related research or whether it's the research related to finding more resources in various exoplanets in our outside our solar system. So the Cambridge group that has found or discovered this potential of new atmosphere says that this chemical DMS which we spoke about, and another chemical called DMDS, that's dimethyl disulfide, both these together are usually found where there is some life existing. And then we've seen traces of both in the atmosphere of this tiny exoplanet. In the Earth, which organism makes these two elements, the DMS and the DMDS? It's created by phytoplankton. Now phytoplankton are generally marine organisms that live underwater, and of course by certain degrees of bacteria. Now therefore for your prelims, a little bit to know about what exactly is the planet K218b. Well, it's a It's an exoplanet, and when I say exoplanet, we all know it means that it is outside our solar system. It was discovered although back in 2015, but about the atmospheric composition we are discovering now. So this is one planet that is in size smaller than your planet Neptune, which itself is considered very small, and it lies in the habitable zone, region where the liquid water as such is not possible to exist. It is located, as I said, 124 light years from the Earth. It orbits a red dwarf star. Apart from that, this particular exoplanet has a hydrogen-rich atmosphere, making it a likelihood, making it a possibility that this planet could support life. So that's the heart and core of the article, that yes, this exoplanet could have life. Now, what has been the role of the James Webb Telescope? Well, in 2021, it was a huge breakthrough because this is one of the most powerful telescopes, space telescopes to ever have been built by mankind. It can not only observe infrared light, by which we can study atmospheres which pertain to far remote exoplanets also. It is also sometimes used to study specific wavelengths of chemicals in the space which absorb light, and therefore we can tap into easily identifiable spectral signatures. So again, a lot of cosmic phenomena can be observed here. And now talking about the discovery of this particle DMS, dimethyl sulfide, that we are talking about, they are saying that if there is a possibility of this chemical being found in the atmosphere of this tiny exoplanet K218b, then it means that today we can say that no known non-living organism has ever been able to produce the DMS in the same amount as we find it in the Earth. So definitely the conclusion is that there is a high possibility of biological activity, biochemic activity going on this planet. A very good question for prelims perspective based on science could be, how do you detect this element, DMS or the DMDS? The method is known as transit spectroscopy. Transit spectroscopy, where you actually, as a planet passes in front of its stars, parallel motion, you can filter light or wavelengths coming from the atmosphere of various planets. And then what happens when you are able to capture specific wavelengths? It creates a kind of impression which is known as spectral fingerprint, and therefore it leads to identification of the atmospheric composition of these planets. So these are certain facts that could really help us in a prelims exam. Of course, it's a groundbreaking discovery, as we said, because if tomorrow it is confirmed that yes, this planet has life, it's the strongest evidence that humans have found for extraterrestrial life so far in our history of space exploration. Okay, and having said that, there are certain things that we need to be aware about as per the article. Say for example, this is just an initial observation. Let's not really jump the guns. Let's not presume that we have already tapped into extraterrestrial life. So let's hold on and see what more developments happen. Apart from that, sometimes spectral data, all the hints of the wavelength of the emission that we have captured through this telescope, sometimes it can be misleading, sometimes because it's a very far away located planet. And of course, there is another aspect that nobody is talking about. We are saying that this chemical known as the DMS or the DMDS can only be created by a living organism. What if? The article questions what if there are certain non-living organisms, abiotic forms of life, who also create this material? We don't know, it's possible. So therefore it's too early to really tap into a conclusion, but yes, it's an amazing discovery which has a lot of scope in going forward. And now in India also, under the aegis of ISRO, not only are we talking about our mission Aditya L1 or the Shukrayaan or the Mangalyaan, but of course we are also talking about the Gaganyaan, our first human-oriented space mission, and then we are talking about the AstroSat. Further developments of rich, detailed, complex telescopes with which we also can join the global community in future such mind-blowing researches. Okay, and on that note, we go on now to one more article that's important, and it was also today in the Hindu, the Hyderabad edition. The article talks about how India is all set to create its first prototype fast breeder reactor, and it will be ready next year, that's 2026. Again, talks volumes about two things: our self-sufficiency in producing defense equipment, our huge feats that we have covered as a nation right after 1970s to today, when we are all set to create our fast breeder prototype just by next year. Okay, so absolutely in line with India's enhancing nuclear capacity. So India now is further boosting its nuclear capacity, and we are talking about a prototype fast breeder reactor. What's the specific and important thing about this type of reactor? It is that it will use plutonium based oxide as its fuel, and it will use sodium as its coolant. These are the two most important ingredients that will be utilized by the reactor. Both are relevant for your prelims as well as GS paper 3 science and technology, because you might get a question on how is the prototype fast breeder reactor different from the previous versions and why is it unique, what's the type of technology it uses. So here it is, and now it is also a milestone in India's 3-stage nuclear program. Let's remember that this is being developed at Bhavini, that is the agency which will be responsible for making this unique production, and it is not the same as India's NPCIL. Otherwise, most of the power plants are rooted from there, but this one is being developed by Bhavini. So that's again something that we must remember. So what is this prototype fast breeder reactor? The most important question which we need to know for this article. It means that this nuclear reactor is typically designed, as we said, to use plutonium mixed fuel as its base. Of course, we know that the coolant that it will need is sodium. Let's understand that this fuel is known as MOX. Again, an important fact for the prelims. Okay, and the fact that it is using sodium as the coolant also means that it is having excellent superlative heat transfer properties, so it will not heat up very fast. That's the best thing about the reactor. Again, another interesting thing is that it operates on the mechanism of closed fuel cycle. Very important fact again. What do you mean that the fast breeder reactor operates on the basis of closed fuel cycle? What we are trying to say, that it uses all the spent fuel, all the used fuel from heavy water reactors, and it produces more nuclear material, which is known as fissile material which keeps on degenerating. There is a constant reaction happening. Nuclear fission reaction is happening, which is opposite of fusion, of course. Fission reaction keeps on happening endlessly. So it creates much more fission material than it actually consumes as a raw material. So that's why it's known as a fast breeding or fast disintegrating, fast fissioning reactor. And it keeps on creating a very, very fissile material, a very, very radioactive material, which is referred to as plutonium-239. So all these are very critical. You've already seen the reactors that typically work on uranium. It's separate kind of isotopes. But today we are talking about another isotope. This is plutonium-239. That's important, and that is why this reactor is different. It is much more fissile as compared to the previous ones based on uranium and its isotopes. Now let's remember that here this reactor also enables recycling and reusing fuel. That's a brilliant thing about this reactor. Usually it's a big problem to dispose radioactive waste. Now multiple articles from the Hindu in the last year and in this year have been talking about how difficult it is to actually dispose of nuclear waste. Typically they put it in a glass film and they throw it in the ocean. But again, there is a risk. Definitely, sometimes they bury it down. Again, that could lead to the bottom layer of soil and the groundwater contamination. Sometimes it's not disposed properly. No wonder there are some nuclear sites which are very radioactive even in India. So to avoid that kind of a problem of disposing the nuclear waste systematically, the best thing about the reactor is that it operates on a zero waste or very little waste mechanism. It does not create enough nuclear waste. That's again a feat. So we must understand then therefore what are India's current capacities talking about nuclear reactors, nuclear power. The first is India has an installed nuclear capacity of 8.18 gigawatts. Of course, there are more under construction. They are yet to be commissioned. Now by 2031, 2032, just the next decade, we are planning to increase this capacity and go off to 22.48 GW. Okay, so what are some challenges? But the biggest challenges is that using sodium as a coolant could mean more money coming in, because any technology that's more sophisticated will always need more protocols in place. So therefore, the sodium being used as a coolant means it has to be stored very effectively. Otherwise, it causes a hazard. It's a danger. So that's one problem. Another problem is that multiple times many reactors are in process but they haven't been commissioned. The process is slow. So we must expedite that given the need for power that India has today as a giant economy. Another thing is waste management. Of course, today we are talking about this level of advanced technology which doesn't produce much waste, but the already existing pile of waste, that added to whatever little waste we assume shall be coming from such technologies in future, that has to be managed critically well. Given that India has a high density of population, we must make sure that waste disposal sites are created very safely. Another problem is that public acceptance and regulations, which means that it's best to have such safety protocols which are democratized. People should have an awareness about them. A lot of public segments have raised concerns. There have been, in fact, PILs also about exactly what's the nature of waste mechanism. It's not very transparent yet. There is opacity. People do not know. So it could pose danger to rural tribal communities or to communities which are coastal inhabitants, because generally the waste sites are situated nearby, and that's very dangerous. So radiation safety is a very important thing to understand here. And now the last article for the day. Again, it's coming from the Hindu. It's a prelims article, but quite interesting. It says how India is experiencing a mixed reaction. Why? Because China also has come up with a decision that now we will not export rare earth elements. REE we call them. Why is it such a big problem for us? It's a problem because China is one of the leading suppliers of REEs, an element which has critical usage in defense component, in semiconductor industry, in electronics, in electric cars, in battery manufacturing. So for something as basic as this, which is a raw material across many consumer goods domains, today if the supply is less and India has few sources, where will we go? That's the problem. So India is taking it again with a very mixed reaction. There are many countries who have been very badly influenced by this China's decision that we will not supply REEs. We will cut down on the export. India is not badly impacted. India has a very moderate reaction. Maybe in future it's a danger. If we are continuing to depend on China for REEs, it might be dangerous. We know today we are living in a world where geopolitics influences trade policies too, of course. So in future it might be a problem, but as of now we are kind of safe. Let's see what the article says. Article says that China is creating export restriction on heavy rare earth elements. Why? It's a retaliation. In the second article we saw how the trade war is going on. There is action, there is retaliation, and it's becoming a process now. So it's on the part of the US-China ongoing trade rivalry, which has led to this step by China. But again, it has problems for the entire global community. Why? Because India, although is not yet very poorly impacted, why? We'll see the reasons now. But there are other countries who are heavily impacted by this decision. Now, the government of India is saying that, of course, REEs are important. It's not like REE or rare earth metals are not important. They are important. But today the problem is India is not very heavily dependent on them. We still lag behind. We lag behind when it comes to using this. We lag behind in manufacturing associated with REEs, so we are safe. But tomorrow it will not be the same. Growing economy, growing demands for energy, growing consumption of electronic goods and gadgets. We will need it. So tomorrow it could mean a problem. Today we are a little less impacted, but still it means in future our dependence on REEs has to get realigned. We cannot depend on one source, that's China. So first, what are REEs? For your exam it's important. What are REEs? Whether it's prelims, whether it's GS3 science and tech. So REEs or rare earth elements are 17 basically chemicals which have similar elements. They have wide usage where, as I said, semiconductor manufacturing. When you make magnets for wind turbines of electronic vehicles, so in general the electronic vehicle segment, of course in various kind of defense equipments and in electronics it has a major use. It's like a raw material used in the batteries of many electronics. Now this REE or the rare earth element, it includes both kinds, the heavy REEs and the light REEs. There are some differentiations. Of course, you can tap into your periodic table. In the periodic table, you have a clear-cut illustrative demonstration of where exactly are these located. So talking about some like cerium, lanthanum, all these are the light ones. Talking about dysprosium, talking about lutetium, talking about samarium, and talking about gadolinium. All these are coming under the category of heavy rare earth elements. Now, these are also very critical if we talk about tomorrow moving towards the green and renewable energy segment, because they are also used in the batteries that are used in solar gadgets, solar cells. When we say semiconductors, of course, solar cells also, they need this as a part of their battery manufacturing. So today, if India is aligned to its 2030 target of investing majorly in green energy, of cutting down our national determined contributions by 33%, and moving towards an economy that's primarily driven by solar and other renewable sources. Now all these yojanas come into the picture, therefore PM, Kusum and all of that. Remember about them too. So what happens? We need them, and that's the problem. We are completely dependent on China. So if they are so important to manufacturing of defense equipment, green energy, electronics, consumer goods, then of course it's important. Whether it's fighter jets or communication systems, ICT technology also depends on it. So today or tomorrow, India will have a blind dependence on REEs also, just like few other countries are having today, like Japan and South Korea, who are very nuanced when it comes to their manufacturing of defense equipment and electronics. So what is India doing really? India is now understanding that in today's world characterized by huge kind of geopolitical shifts, we must become Atmanirbhar, self-reliant even when it comes to manufacturing or finding out, tapping into REEs. Say for example, of course, you have the Atmanirbhar, the Made in India mission, where we encourage local domestic manufacturing. So we need right sources, raw material. Of course, we have the PLI scheme for electronics and semiconductors. That's the problem. We say that in India it's not found. Maybe it is found. The main thing is we are yet not ready to extract it. Now, very recently, there was a district in Jammu and Kashmir. There was one in Karnataka also. In both these areas, exactly 2 years before, we had found certain sites for rare earth elements. Can anybody tell me which sites were those? Now, if you enjoy the lecture, if you really look forward to more such fun and informative lectures, then I would need comments. Otherwise, I won't be convinced. So please post me a comment here and let me know which sites am I talking about where we had discovered some possibility of finding rare earth elements in India. I've told you the states also. I need the answers, please. Okay, so it's difficult to extract it right now. Also, people say that the environmental cost of extraction is very high. Suppose you talk about the Zambia-Katanga zone of Africa. It's known for extraction of metals like cobalt and zinc and all those kind of elements which have application in electronics industry. So there also we find a lot of rare earth element sites, but it's very exploitative because the environmental impact of it and the social impact of it in terms of child and female labor is very disheartening. So that's an ethical question also. So what to do? Keep on investing more in extracting the rare earth metals with whichever technology we have, or it's better sometimes to be import dependent given the other cost that we pay when it comes to extraction. So these are certain debates that the article has also pointed out towards. And now India is today not very deeply impacted. Why? It's a paradox. We are saying it's rare earth elements are needed in defense, it's needed in green energy, but still we are saying it's less impacted. Why? It's less impacted because in India today, if you see, the demand overall for all the products that are created by using REE is on the lower side only. So let's talk about the electronic vehicle segment. How much is the consumption absorption? Quite poor. Not so much, unlike in other countries. So semiconductor fabrication also is in a very early stage, rudimentary stage. We are still a long way to go. Similarly, defense manufacturing, electronic production is also not at par with other such countries like US, China. So therefore today we are somewhere in the preliminary stage of self-manufacturing. So we can wait. Maybe it's not that big a problem for us, but tomorrow, as I said, it might be. And REE imports in 23-24 was only 2270 tons, which is quite very less. And generally there is yet a lot of research which is yet to be done in this segment. So India generally keeps importing its rare earth element from China, US and Europe. Okay, and generally we keep importing our REE based components, exactly raw REE. We are not importing much. We are only importing little bit gadgets and equipments which are already using REE. So therefore we are not very impacted by China's decision. But future dependence, as I said, is a problem. Today if China is facing a curb, then what happens? Supply chain is getting weaker. So which means more expensive products if you depend on imports. So you have to today or tomorrow do a proper research into mining or extraction of them within your country. That's the poise made by the article. Is the government doing anything really in this segment of mineral and REE exploration? Yes, we talk about the National critical mineral mission that was announced back in 23-24 by the finance minister. The objectives of the mission were very clear. Please identify 30 crucial important minerals which include REEs for our better domestic manufacturing. Reduce dependence on import, specifically from countries like China, with whom anyways we share a very hot and cold relationship often. Then we talk about having a better permission system for mineral exploration. We need to have environmental clearance. Now in India, the role of NGT therefore also becomes important here. So the article, see, that's the beauty of these articles. They at once talk about many such sectors in a hidden way. Implicitly, we are also talking about the NGT and its approval process. That's again a major grey area in India, GS paper 3, right? So we need to talk about this. Do we have environmental clearances? Do we need to evacuate? Specifically, these are found in mountainous regions or in tribals belt, in forested belts. So what do we do about the population that's settled there? Rehabilitation also comes under question therefore. Then we talk about better funding. Don't we need more funding for more research, more investigation, more excavation of these products? Yes, we do. And of course, we need more public-private partnership. The PPP model, it will work wonderfully to extract more REEs. And initiatives that the government is taking already are the rare earth and titanium theme park that was created using technology from institutes like BARC. India is also trying to create many global partnerships in exploration. Say for example, the Toitsu Rare Earth India Limited in Visakhapatnam. Through international collaboration also we are trying exploration. And then of course recently we found in Gujarat one carbonatite deposit. Okay, and then of course we have other such facilities in Odisha, Kerala and many other such regions. But of course I asked you a question, which two areas did we find some kind of possibility of rare earth elements? So do post it in the comment, I'll wait for your comment, and then we could absolutely proceed with certain questions that I've shared today. So these questions, say for example from UPSC 2012, it speaks about how the rare earth metal or rare earth element has a major role to play when it comes to India's semiconductor, defense and green energy segment. So all in all these articles help us in breaking down how to exactly address all these issues that we saw today, whether it's the defense, whether it's the space exploration, whether we talk about the trade war and India's danger of future dumping. And then of course, as we are talking about the rare earth element, India's dependence and all domestic manufacturing discussion. So on that note, I'd like to end today's session, and I think it was a pretty diverse session because we spoke about multiple topics at once. So before I leave, I would really like you to answer two questions for me. One of course is the one that I raised a few minutes back, and the other one would be that what do you think exactly is the possibility that if tomorrow we are tapping into the extraterrestrial life, say in this tiny exoplanet, do you think this could also address India's problem of resource crunch? Do you think? Apart from that, I also want to know, no answer but just a perspective. I would want to have your perspective on what are the ecological disasters associated with more and more excavation of things like REEs. What's your take on that? What's your opinion on that? That's a very interesting question really. So post us with those answers and comments. Of course, give your feedback, that's hugely awaited. And on that note, I'll take your end here at Narayana IAS Academy. Thanks for the lovely session, and I hope to have many such more wonderful sessions with you in the future. All the best.